Greetings fellow guitar travellers, it's Rowan J Parker here and welcome to episode 3 of Music Theory 101, giving you all the absolute basics must know about music theory that every guitar player and every musician in general should be aware of. So today in Music Theory 101 we're going to be expanding upon last week's lesson, which dealt with the harmonised major scale and triads, and we're going to be expanding that out to sevenths and giving you a few fun factoids along the way. So I hope you enjoy it, hope you find it interesting and informative. So off we go for episode 3 of Music Theory 101. Let's do it! Now, we saw in last week's episode how we can take the major scale and we can create a series of chords based upon it, one for each degree or step of the scale. So just to recap, C major notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Chords, first chord, C major, and then D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished, returning to C one octave higher. And this gives what's called the diatonic chord scale for C major, also known as the harmonised scale. Now, one of the things I get asked quite often is, what about these mysterious chords like sevenths and ninths and elevenths and so on? Well, where do they come from? Well, actually it's fundamentally very simple, because all we're going to do is expand the chord construction procedure up and up and up, and that's where we get these larger chords from. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the scale of C major, the harmonised scale of C major, but this time expanded out to what's called sevenths, chord scale sevenths. So let's just remind ourselves how to construct a triad. We take the root, and then a third above that, and then a fifth above that. So we have a 3-note chord consisting of the notes of, in this case, C, E and G, which is root, major, third, perfect, fifth, and this is a C major triad. The first chord in the key of C. Very simple, right? To add the seventh, then all we do is we add the seventh, i.e. 7 notes up the scale. So counting up from C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. That's the 7th above the C note. So if we just insert that note into our triad chord, we now get a 4-note chord consisting of the notes of C, E, G and B. So this is how we create a 7th chord. It's root, 3rd, 5th and 7th. Or if you like traditional intervals, it's the tonic, major 3rd, perfect 5th and major 7th. So this is the first chord in the key of C, harmonised or expanded out to a 7th chord, and it is C major 7. Okie dokie. And fundamentally that's a procedure for creating 7th chords. So if we do that on every step of the scale, then we'll get all the chords in the key of C but harmonised out to chord scale 7ths. So let's just do that. Let's go to the 2nd degree of the scale, which is D, and create our 7th chord. So we'll have a root, a 3rd, a 5th and a 7th, and these notes are D, F, A and C, and the intervals tonic, minor 3rd, perfect 5th and minor 7th interval. Another way you could express these intervals, we would call it 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. So if you're more familiar with that terminology, that's how we could express the intervals in that chord. However, the chord that it actually is D minor 7th. Is a minor triad plus the interval of a minor 7, making in total in combination a D minor 7 chord. Okay, moving on to the 3rd degree of the scale, starting on the note of E, we have E, G, B and D, which is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, root, minor 3rd, perfect 5th and minor 7th. So this is another minor 7th chord, which I think you can clearly hear, it's minor 7. Moving on to the 4th degree of the scale, we have F, A, C, E. Okie dokie. So the interval construction, root, major 3rd, perfect 5th and major 7, or if you like jazz nomenclature, it's just 1, 3, 5, 7. So this is another major 7th chord. So at this point in the chord scale, we've gone up 4 chords up the scale, and we've only got 2 sorts of chords. We've got a major 7, and then a minor 7, another minor 7, and then another major 7. So there's only 2 chord types so far. However, the next chord type is different. Now, a lot of my students often say to me, well, surely the 5th chord, if it was just a G major chord when it was a triad, when it's a 7th, it'll be another major 7, right? Well, no, it won't be. And let's investigate why that is. If we construct a triad on the 5th degree, we get G, B and D. However, if we add the 7th, it's the note of F. Now, giving you this in intervals, it's root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, but this interval from G to F is not the interval of a major 7, it's the interval of a minor 7th. And so a major triad plus the interval of a minor 7th creates a new chord type which is called a dominant 7th. Or these days we usually just call it 7. So this would be G7, or G dominant 7 is its correct title. Here it is in jazz nomenclature, 1, 3, 5 flatted 7th, 1, 3, 5 flat 7. Alright, now the dominant 7th chord is a very important chord, and it is unique because there is only one dominant 7th chord in a key, so it can function somewhat as a giveaway chord if you're trying to determine the key you're actually in. Chord sequence you might have is look for the dominant 7th chord because it is the 5th degree and you can therefore infer what key you're actually in. Alright, so dominant 7th on the 5th degree, and then 6th degree we've got A, C, E, G. Now that is an A minor triad plus the interval of a minor 7. So construction for this one, 1 flat 3 5 flat 7, or root minor 3rd, perfect 5th and minor 7. So it's another minor 7th chord. And then the last chord, built upon the note of B, the 7th degree, is B, D, F and A. Now again, this is a rather unusual sounding and unique chord because it is the only one in the scale. The construction of this is root minor 3rd, diminished 5th and minor 7, or to give it the other nomenclature, it's 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. Now there's two ways of describing this chord. It can either be described as minor 7 flatted 5th, minor 7 flat 5, because that's what it is. It is a minor 7th chord, but with a flattened 5th. Alright? The other way of describing this chord is to call it half diminished, because we'll see when we look at other scales, especially the harmonic minor scale, there is a chord called a diminished 7th. Well, this chord isn't quite as diminished as that, so it's called half diminished. Personally, I prefer minor 7 flat 5. It seems to describe what the chord is better, easier to understand. It's just a minor 7th chord with a flattened 5th. Okay, that's all 7 chords. So if we put them in sequence, we get this ascending order. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7 or G dominant 7, A minor 7, B minor 7 flat 5, and then back to C major 7. And that is it. That's the harmonised chord scale for C major. And here's some additional interesting factoids about these 7th chords. First of all, this chord, the dominant 7th. I often get asked, why is it called dominant 7th? Well, the reason for that is really quite straightforward. We saw in last week's episode that each degree of the scale has a technical name attached to it. So the first degree is called the tonic, the second is called the supertonic, and then the mediant, subdominant, then the dominant, submediant, and then leading note or leading tone. So we could say that the chord built on the 5th degree, the triad built on the 5th degree, is the dominant triad. In this case it would be G major in the key of C. If we expand the chord to a 7th chord, then surely it becomes the 7th chord built upon the dominant note of the scale, i.e. the dominant 7th. And that's where that comes from, dominant 7th. Of course, it usually these days just gets abbreviated to 7th and the dominant is implied. So just realise that, for instance, C7 and C dominant 7th are the same chord. Alright, now some interesting things about 7th chords, especially major 7th chords. The major 7th interval, that is the interval between the 1st degree and the 7th degree of the chord, is actually quite dissonant. Listen. It's actually pretty nasty. And there was a time when this sort of dissonance would have been considered extremely challenging and quite unmusical. But composers round about the 18th century began to use major 7th sounds, and one of the first people to use major 7th sounds was a composer called Erik Satie, and he's got a very famous piece called Gymnopédie, which features these major 7th chords. And at the time, the use of these chords was pretty revolutionary. It was daring. It was something very unusual. So here's an interesting thing about harmony. Going back to the first episode, we learnt that originally melodies were all just either played in unison or in octaves, and then sometimes they were played in fifths. And And then the triad was invented. And for quite a long time, that's really all we had. But as chords began to expand and develop, then more and more so-called dissonant intervals began to be included in chords, and the sound of chords began to expand. So in a very broad way, what you could say is that the notes that people used to perceive as sounding dissonant, i.e. sounding out of tune or sounding a bit tense or discordant, these notes are gradually and slowly evolving into what we call consonant intervals. That is, notes which sound pleasing to the ear. Because to most people, hearing a major seventh chord, most people today hearing this chord, it's a very pleasant sounding chord, and it's hard to think back to a time when this must have sounded absolutely horrible or right at the cutting edge of, oof, that's a bit radical. So dissonant intervals are slowly evolving into consonant intervals, and we accept more and more and more dissonance in chords, and especially if you listen to jazz, you hear dissonances all over the place, and it's actually part of the music, it's integral to the music. So it is interesting that our ears globally are starting to develop more, and we accept more and more dissonant sounds that we would have thought sounded horrible a few hundred years ago. We now think that's absolutely fine, passes without any comment whatsoever. So that is quite an interesting thing. Here's another interesting thing. Now here's a question that I get asked from time to time. You get triads, and then 7th chords, and then 9th chords, 11th chords, and even 13th chords, but you don't get 15th chords, you don't get 17th chords, you don't get a G19 chord. So why not? Why is the biggest chord you're going to get going to be just a 13th? And so let's explain that to you. And let's take as our example a D minor triad, right? Which is the notes of D, F, and A. Now let's add the 7th to that. So it's D, F, A, and C. 4 notes, right? Now let's add the 9th to that. D, F, A, C, E, right? Now let's add the 11th to that, which is D, F, A, C, E, and G. And now let's add the 13th to that, which is D, F, A, C, E, G, and B. Right, now how many notes is that? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. And how many notes are in a major scale? 7. Alright, and that's the reason why you can't get a chord bigger than a 13th, because if you go up another interval of a third, you're just going to arrive at D again, which will be the root. So the biggest chord you can possibly play is a 13th for that reason, because it will use all 7 notes of the scale. Now if you actually think about this on the guitar, it's not possible to play an entire 13th chord on the guitar. Why not? Well, for the very obvious reason that you only have 6 strings. So in that case, even big voicings like 13th tend to be compressed down just to around about 4 notes, and I'll cover that in some other video. Alright, well, that's a brief look at 7th harmony. I hope that's clear enough and you understand everything there. So I'm just going to do the wrap up now. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode and you're learning a little bit more about how chords are constructed, and I think you can see there's really no great mystery, it's just the application of some simple principles. In next week's episode we're going to be looking at a subject which confuses the hell out of the vast majority of guitar players, and that is modes. So we're going to be covering modal theory and explain to you how it works. I should also at this point give a plug for a forthcoming video that I'll be doing, which is called Modal Magic, and it will be going into modes in enormous depth and detail, because of all the things that I teach, it's usually modes which are the most misunderstood, and actually there doesn't have to be much of a grounds for misunderstanding modes. They're really not particularly difficult, you just need to understand a little bit about how chords and scales fit together. So anyway, just plugging that forthcoming product for you. Otherwise, I encourage you to look at my website, which is www.rowanjparker.com. Tons of guitar stuff on that site, as you know, and most of which is free. There are products in the store which you can download. Very reasonable prices, all high quality downloads. What else can I tell you about? Yeah, I'm on SoundCloud as well. It's Rowan-Parker. You can download tons of backing tracks for free on my SoundCloud page. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. I have a Facebook page you can like if you like, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, even though it's disgusting and I hate it, feel free. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode. I'll catch you next week for another episode of Music Theory 101. Till then, farewell.